Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our weekly Parsha class. This week, we will be studying the Torah portion of Vayishlach, this week's Torah portion, and we will be focusing on one of the iconic moments, not only in this week's Parsha, but really in all of Torah, certainly in the book of Bereshis, in the stories of our patriarchs and matriarchs. And the story I want to focus on is the battle that Yakov has in the middle of the night, the midnight battle that Yakov has, at the end of which he is given a new name. Let's read through the Pasuk and the Rashi. This episode, without a doubt, is meant to convey profound meaning and teaching for all of eternity. You know, some of the commentaries on Bereshis focus more on how each episode in the Torah is a precursor for something that'll take place in Jewish history for the Jewish people later. But this section, everyone agrees, has cosmic importance about the future and the struggles of the Jewish people. So here's what we say. Verse number 25. Let's give a little bit of the backdrop before this verse. So Yakov, at the end of last week's Torah portion, runs away from his father-in-law Lavan. He then encounters Lavan, and now he's continuing on his journey, and he's now headed toward Esav. And he's not sure how his brother feels about him. He knows that 20 years earlier, when he left, his brother wanted to kill him. But he's hopeful that maybe 20 years have passed, and hopefully at this point his brother perhaps has done very well for himself and therefore is no longer angry and therefore would welcome a warm relationship with his brother. He sends emissaries or angels to check out the situation, and they return and they say, no, nothing has changed. Your husband is headed towards you. Your brother is headed towards you, and he's got 400 warriors with him. So Yaakov is very afraid, and he prepares himself, as the Torah says, in 3 different ways. He prepares himself for this encounter by sending a gift in case he can appease his brother. He prepares himself for war. He arms himself and his camp for battle. And finally, he turns to God in prayer. Those are the 3 steps that he takes to prepare himself. And from here we derive how we should prepare ourselves in the challenging moments we have to face in life. Again, prepare in some way through appeasement, through battle, and through prayer. And this is where we kind of find ourselves in verse 25. At this point, he sends his family ahead, and Yakov remains alone. Vayivasar Yakov levada. Yakov remains alone. Vayeavek ish imoy. For a moment, I want to remove just focus on the bolded letters in the English translation. And a man wrestles with him ad alos hashachar, until daybreak. A man wrestles with Yaakov until daybreak. This is a very mysterious verse. It doesn't explain anything. You know, if there's a battle, if there's a struggle, the Torah should clarify, why was this person there? Who was he? Why was he battling Yaakov? So first, let's go to Rashi. Rashi says, Vayivaser Yaakov. Yaakov remained alone. Why was he alone? Says Rashi, because he had forgotten some small jars and went back for them. So Yaakov goes back to retrieve the small jars that he had left there. Our sages explained that Yaakov valued every one of his possessions, and therefore he didn't want to leave small jars. Mystically, Reb Chaim Vital, the student of the Arizal, explains that the reason he was so concerned about all of his belongings is because a tzaddik knows that everything that belongs to them is part of their service of Hashem. And therefore, if Yaakov were to simply have left the items there, have forgotten them, then that would mean there was a certain part of his role, certain part of his job here on earth, which he had neglected. Anything that we are given. All of our possessions are part of our purpose here on earth. The fact that I have a home is because I am meant to elevate the home and sanctify the home by doing holy things in my home and by being charitable and righteous in my home. So those are the ways in which you can sanctify your belongings. Yakov, remember that he had certain items that he had forgotten, so therefore he said, I can't leave those. They're part of my divine mission, which is a very profound idea, how we view that which we own. But then the next part of the pasuk, which I want to focus on a little bit more. Vayeavek ish ima, and a man wrestled with him. Ad alos hashachar, until the break of dawn. Says Rashi, who is this ish? And what is this battle? And what is vayeavek? Vayeavek is an unusual term. You have the word vayilachem, which is battling. You have striking, vayaka. There's different words. Vayeavek is not a very common term. The word ye'avek, so Rashi quotes Menachem ben Saruk, who explains that the word avek comes from the word avak, which means dust. And therefore they grappled with one another, and so much so that the dust rose from their feet. Rashi himself feels otherwise, and he says, no, avek, vayeavek is a form of cleaving. That's what Rashi says. Loshin vayiskasher. It's an Aramaic word. It's similar to an Aramaic word, which is where they means they are attached, which is in the intense fighting that could take place between two people. The closest fighting is when they are literally attached to one another in battle. Mystically, I know today we're kind of going to be throwing in from various angles of Torah as we move along in this section. Mystically, Chassidus explains that the attachment over here was that the angel of Esav sought to attach himself to the energy of Yakov. Yakov has a very strong divine energy, and klipa, negative forces, unholy forces, only are able to survive by cleaving to that which is holy and drawing energy from that which is holy. So that's the more Kabbalistic understanding of what takes place over here, and there's a lot of Kabbalah on this, but that this ish, this being, this man, was cleaving to Yaakov to try to draw from him, like a leech, to draw from him the divine energy that Yaakov was blessed with. Let's move on. I mean, we will evaluate this entire episode. Let's move on to verse 26. Vayarki lachi lo yachola. When the angel saw that he could not overcome him, vayiga bekaf yerechai, and he struck Yaakov's hip joint. Vateka kaf yerech Yaakov, and he dislocated Yaakov's hip joint. Behe afko imo, as he wrestled with him. So he dislocated Yaakov's hip joint. Rashi says it's the upper end of the thigh bone, and he dislocated it. At that point, verse 27 continues, Vayomer, and the angel said, Shalcheni, send me on my way, ki ola hashachar, for the dawn is breaking. Vayomer le'ashalechacha, Yaakov replies, I will not send you on your way, ki im berachtani, unless you bless me. So here Rashi tells us the mystical nature of this conversation. What is the logic to it? You get into a fight. This guy started the fight. If someone starts the fight, they don't have the right. They don't have the right to say when it ends. You started the fight, so then as soon as Yaakov feels that the battle is over, that's when Yaakov lets go. Right? That's what's going on in Israel right now. Terrorists start the battle on October 7th, commit all sorts of horror and atrocities, and then they say, ceasefire. It's not going well for us. We'd like a ceasefire. If you start the fight, then you got to suffer the consequences, which is to be defeated. But over here, somehow, the angel turns to Yaakov. This person, this Ish, we don't even know it's an angel. We just know it's an Ish, a person. Turns to Yaakov and says, let me go. Why? Because the morning has come. So what? What's the logic there? And Yaakov's answer is equally perplexing. And he says, no, you want to leave? Fine, I'll let you leave. On condition that what? You bless me. So what emerges from here is that this pasuk right here is really where you see that there's something much more profound than simply a midnight scuffle between two people. The fact that he asked him to leave because it's morning, the fact that Yakov concedes only on condition that you bless me, this pasuk tells us that there is something. This is not just a brawl, a common brawl. So what does Rashi? How does Rashi clarify? Ki Allah hashachar, morning has come. Says Rashi, v'tzarach ani lomar shira bayom, and I must sing God's song of praise by day. The angel is my role during the daytime is to sing God's praise. Berach tani. So Yaakov says, only if you bless me. Says Rashi. The blessing over here is, what he really means is, I want you to acknowledge the blessings that I received from Yitzchak. This whole conflict with Esav began. Where did it begin? Where did this whole confrontation? He's about to reach Esav. Where does it begin? It begins with the blessings that Yaakov deceptively took from Yitzchak. So now Yaakov says to the angel, no problem, I'll let you go. But I want you to bless me. And the deeper meaning of this blessing is that I want you to concede that the blessings were, that I received them rightfully, that I deserved them. Because after all, I did deserve them because I had purchased the firstborn right. And therefore the Torah, the pasuk goes on, and he does conceive it in a unique way. Verse 28, he says, what's your name? He says, Yakov. And he says, no longer should your name just be Yakov, should your name be Yakov, but rather you should be called Yisrael, Ki im Yisrael. Ki sarisa im Elokim, because you have striven, you have battled, you have struggled with God and with man, vatuchal, and you have overcome. As Rashi says, lo, what does it mean your name should no longer be Yaakov? His name continued to be Yaakov. We keep on calling him Yaakov. But Yaakov is connected to deception. Akeva umirma. He says, no longer will your blessings be associated with Yaakov, which means deception, but rather now it'll be sorisa, asar. Now you will have the overcome, the power to overcome. You overcome the spiritual forces that oppose you. You've overcome the physical forces that have opposed you, and now you can approach these blessings with your head held high as a master of blessing, not as one who received the blessing through deception. Okay, this is the verses in the Torah. What are some of the deeper ideas over here? So I want to turn to the Zohar and the Zohar's commentary on this section, which shares some very, very profound ideas. The Zohar talks to this verse and quotes, again, chapter 32, verse number 25. Vayivasar Yakov levado. Yaakov remained alone. Vayavik ishimo, and a man grappled with him. Says the Zohar. From here we learn the concern of traveling alone at night. Something that the Talmud talks about is that there's an element of danger at night that exists. There's an element perhaps of spiritual danger that exists at night. There are certain powers at night, specifically for one who is traveling alone at night. And this is brought down in Jewish tradition, Jewish law, that if one is traveling at night, one should avoid, if possible, traveling alone at night for several reasons. One of them is some element of spiritual danger. Let's move on to the next one. And the next Zohar is very profound. Adalos hashachar. This battle continues until daybreak. Why? If there is a battle that deserves to happen, then that battle should happen by day or by night. Why does daybreak somehow bring a conclusion to this battle? Furthermore, if you look in the text, who won this war? Who won this battle? We don't really see anything. They just battled through the night, and then morning came, and then suddenly, because of morning, it seems like morning demonstrated to this angel that he could not overcome Yaakov. What does morning have to do with it? What does morning have to do with it? Says the Zohar, Lamadnu. From here we can see that this angel came from a place of severe judgment. When it comes to divine attributes, we have chesed, which is kindness, and we have gvura, which is severity, which is severe judgment. Says the Zohar, from here we can learn that the power of this angel was the power of judgment. And the power of judgment or severity only has power at night. And therefore, once the sun arose, once light came, light represents kindness, the power of divine goodness and kindness, suddenly the angel no longer had the power to stand up to Yakov. And that's when Yakov realized this was an angel. As soon as Yakov realizes, wait a second, the only thing, suddenly my opponent is weaker. And the only thing that changed from 10 minutes ago to now is that the sun is coming up. That's when Yakov realized, this is not a typical fight. This is a fight with an angel. And that explains why in the sunshine, when there's light, this angel of severity no longer has power against me. And that's when the angel says to Yaakov, let me go. I no longer have the ability to stand up to you. Because the light has risen, and my power is broken because of the light. The light over here represents the light of chesed, the light of God's kindness, the light of God's goodness. And that's when Yaakov overtakes the angel. So really, through the night, they were equal in their strength. When the sun arose, suddenly Yaakov has power. The Zohar continues, and here's where we can apply this to ourselves. From here, come and see. Lefisha shlitas hasitra achra, the power of impurity, the spiritual power of impurity, only has power at nighttime. Nighttime could also, and perhaps primarily, means spiritual darkness. The power of Esav is only at night, says the Zohar. The power of Esav is only during exile, only during Galus. And therefore, it was only by night that this entity chose to wage a war against Yakov. When the sun arose, suddenly this angel was powerless. What is the depth of this idea? The depth of this idea, and this is something that the Rebbe certainly championed a lot, and that was that when we deal with forces of negative, it's important to realize, and that could be a person you may know who's trying to cause, who has negative influence. It could be that in the world there's a lot of negativity, there's a lot of hatred. Today we know there's all sorts of anti-Semitism and there's hatred and it's terrible. So often we find ourselves consumed with the battle against the hate. How do we respond to hatred? How do we confront the hatred? How do we confront this enemy, sometimes a faceless enemy who's grappling with us? And the Zohar says that sometimes the solution and the victory to this battle is not going to be by grappling in the darkness. The solution is going to be, how can you cause the sun to rise? What can you do to bring light to the situation? What can you do to add light to one's Jewishness? How can you add light to any circumstance you're in? And when you bring more light, more goodness, more holiness, more Torah, more Jewish pride into the picture, the darkness fades and the power of the enemy fades as well. Again, this was a calling card of the Rebbe, that the Rebbe lived in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And there was a lot of, in the aftermath of the Holocaust, there was, and until today, we have a lot of emphasis on what's our response to the Holocaust, and never again, and how do we respond to Jewish hatred. But the Rebbe, although he himself was to some degree a survivor of the Holocaust, he managed to escape. He lost immediate family members in the war. But the Rebbe never focused on the Shoah. Of course, it was part of the collective memory and part of our history. But the Rebbe understood that the path to moving forward for Klal Yisrael, for the Jewish people, was not to linger on and focus on the darkness. It was about bringing light. The Rebbe focused on the idea of adding Torah, adding mitzvahs, publicly, proudly, excitedly. That's how you're going to get rid of the Sarah Esav. As long as you're battling in the darkness, it's going to be an equal battle. You're going to fight, and they're going to fight back, and you're going to fight back, and they're going to fight back. And then maybe that's necessary at times. We're not saying you have to ignore those enemies that rise against us and just not pay attention to them. But don't make that the focal point of your Jewish campaign. And unfortunately, that sometimes happens, is that you ask people what's first and foremost on their mind when they think of being Jewish. They say, well, there's anti-Semitism, or there's never again. That's what first comes to mind when they think of Jewishness. And that is not the answer to overcoming negative forces. That's what the Zohar is saying. Overcoming the negative forces happens when the sun rises. And this is particularly true as we approach Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is exactly about bringing light to darkness. We're still only a couple weeks away from Hanukkah. Hanukkah begins 2 weeks from tonight. But the essence of Hanukkah is more so than any other holiday, is bringing light to darkness, right? Shabbos even though there's Shabbos candles, but as is often pointed out, Shabbos candles are lit inside the house. Shabbos candles are lit in the before sunset, and the Hanukkah candles are lit outside or lighting up the outside, and Hanukkah candles are lit after dark. So Hanukkah, there's one message that Hanukkah has more so than any other holiday. It's the idea of bringing light to darkness. A little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. And this is what the Zohar says is one of the messages of the story. Yakov, as long as it was the middle of the night, Yakov and the opposing enemy had to grapple and fight. But when he emerged, as soon as the sun rose, suddenly the enemy had no more power. At this point, Yakov firmly had control of the situation, so much so that he said, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. Just want to share a couple other ideas that are said over here from the Zohar. Firstly, it says, Vayiga bekaf yerach Yaakov. He struck him in his thigh. He struck him in his thigh. Zohar here shares another fascinating, profound, and eternal message. Amar Rabbi Shimon. This is the great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who says, Bo Yurei, come and see. Why did he strike him in the thigh? What is the significance of that? What is the symbolism of that? And even if he did strike him in the thigh, why does the Torah have to tell us that? Just tell us he injured him or he struck him. Struck him in the thigh. So, Bo Yurei, says Rabbi Shimon, come and see how deceptive, how dishonest the power of unholiness, the power of Klippa, toiled that night in their struggle against Yakov. Why? Because this angel which represented Esav, knew that Hakol kol Yaakov vayedayim midei Esav. He knew the words that Yitzchak had said previously, which is the voice of Yaakov. He knew that the voice, which represents the voice of Torah, the voice of prayer, is the power of Jacob. The power of Jacob is the power of Torah and Tefillah. So first he said, how do I cause Yaakov to lose his strength? I will cause him to lose his strength if I am able to interrupt his Torah and his Tefillah, his Torah and his prayer. But as he looked not only at Yaakov, but as he looked at the descendants of Yaakov throughout history, he realized, Vayar ki lo yachol. He realized, I know that I won't be able to interrupt the Torah and prayer of the Jewish people. They are the people of the book. They will always cherish Torah. They will always turn to Torah for guidance and for direction and for inspiration. Vayar, that's the meaning of the pasuk. Vayar ki lo yachol lo. He saw, I won't be able to defeat Yaakov and cause Yaakov to separate himself from the words of Torah and prayer. Okay? So he said, okay, what's my next option? If I can't defeat the power of Torah and Tefillah directly, so now he says, my next option is to defeat it indirectly. And how is that? The next words of the pasuk is, Vayiga bekaf yireichai. Let me strike the thigh. What is the thigh in the body? The thigh is the support to the body. The thighs are that which we stand upon. Says the Zohar. He said, if I can't strike Yaakov and his Torah study and prayer, I will strike those who support Torah. And I will strike those who support prayer. Because in order for the yeshivas to survive, in order for there to be people dedicated to Torah study and to prayer, the only way that happens is when there are tomchei orai, so those who support the Torah and those who fund it, and those who help, because to operate a yeshiva, to operate a Torah system requires a tremendous amount of support. Right? We don't have a public school system where it's all funded. Yeshivas are privately funded. So the Esav said, the Sar of Esav said, if I can't destroy the voices of Yaakov, let me at least strike the supporters of Torah. And if I strike the supporters of Torah, and there's no longer support for Torah, so then there won't be Torah study, because nobody will be able to do so, because there's no support for it. And here too, he failed. Even though he struck the thigh of Yaakov, and Yaakov was limping, but ultimately there too he failed, because for all of eternity, Just as Torah study will continue, so too the support for Torah study will continue as well. And that's when the victory of Yakov over this angel was complete. And that's when he turns to him and he says, I want you to bless me, because at this point, this is a turning point in Yaakov's life. That until this point in Yaakov's life, he operated through deception. He didn't want to, but until this point, he operated through deception. He was deceptive in receiving the birthright. He was deceptive in receiving the blessing. He was deceived. It was also deception, not that he was deceptive, but he was deceived when it came to his marriage. And then he was deceptive in how he was able to earn the wealth from Lavan, even though it was perfectly legitimate, but there was some element of deception with the sheep from last week's Torah portion. And finally, he was deceptive in how he ran away from Lavan. He ran away. He ran away in the middle of the night. And there was some deception involved, even that which Rachel took the idols of her father, which he wasn't aware of. So you see a theme of deception until this point. Even this midnight battle is somewhat deceptive because this angel shows up as a human being. And at the end of this battle, Yaakov says, I no longer want to accomplish through deception. When we say accomplish with Yaakov, it means spiritual accomplishment. I no longer want to receive the blessings, have the tribes. I know at this point, I've earned the right. But from this point onward, the blessing should come to me through openness and through obvious strength. And that's what the name Yisrael means. Yisrael means you are now a Sar. Sar, you are now a master of the situation. Deception means you are coming underneath, right? Deception means I have to crawl, somehow find a way to deceive my way into that which I want. A Sar, Yisrael, means you are now in control of the situation. But ultimately, even though his name is Yisrael, is given as Yisrael, a very important point which is made is that we still refer to him as Yakov. When Avram's name is changed to Avraham, never again is he called Avram. When Sarai's name is changed to Sarah, never again is she called Sarah. When Yaakov's name is changed to Yisrael, you would think from this point onward, he should be called Yisrael. In fact, the wording of the pasuk is, you will no longer be called Yakov. Your Yaakov will no longer be your name. And yet we find that the name Yaakov continues. Why is that? Why not at this point? He's graduated to Yisrael. And the answer is that the truth is that Yaakov and Yisrael are the two elements that remain a part of the Jewish identity. That even though, yes, Yaakov at this point becomes a Sar, but Yaakov is the father of the Jewish people. And we are referred to as Bnei Yisrael. And Li Rosh, right, exactly. Yisrael is Li Rosh. That the head is to me, again, this idea of authority, that I'm in charge, I'm the master of my circumstance right now. But the fact of the matter is that throughout all of history, each and every one of us as individuals, but also the Jewish people as a whole, will have Yaakov moments and Yisrael moments. We'll have moments which we'll have to struggle to get what we need. We'll perhaps even be deceptive to get what we need, which we are not clearly a master of what the situation we are in. We are working, we are toiling, we are struggling to get to overcome our challenges, struggling to do what's right, perhaps knocked down from time to time. That's all Yaakov. Because that's part of our destiny, so therefore the name remains. We also have Yisrael. We have those moments of pride, those moments of where I feel the strength and the pride of what it means, and I feel like I'm in control, and my enemies are falling before me. Internal enemies, external enemies, all that is Yisrael. It says that 6 days of the week we more so relate to the name Yaakov. On Shabbos we relate to Yisrael. So the back and forth of of life as a Jew includes the elements both of Yaakov and Yisrael. And that's why the name Yisrael and Yaakov both remain part of his identity. But ultimately, the underlying message of this episode in the Torah is the message of victory through struggle. And just as the destiny of Yaakov was to struggle with God and struggle with man, which means struggling with people like Lavan, bad, difficult people, also struggling with divine entities. We have our divine struggles, how to struggle with even if it's not someone who's challenging us, it's the internal struggle, our divine struggle with struggling with God. That's part of our identity. Therefore, we shouldn't be deflated by the struggle. We should recognize that just as Yaakov had to go through this struggle and various struggles in life. And by the way, at this point, Yaakov is 100 years old. We're not talking about a young man who's getting through, he's been through years and years, decades of struggle until finally he reaches the point of Yisrael. This is part of the destiny of Yaakov, and it's part of the destiny of the Jewish people. But ultimately, just as Yaakov is able to overcome it by reaching the morning, by reaching the sun, reaching the sunlight, and then being healed from his ailment, so too we too can overcome our struggles, power through till that sun will rise, both individually and also collectively for the Jewish people when Mashiach comes, which is what the Zohar says. This is what we're referring to. We will be struggling with Esav until Mashiach comes. And then once Mashiach comes, that's when we will receive the ultimate blessings and the eternal blessings. All right. Thank you, everyone. I just very good.